Joseph was a young boy who lived a long, long time ago. He lived with his father Jacob and his 11 brothers. They were a very big family, living in a land filled with sunshine and fields for their sheep. Joseph was special to his father Jacob. He was the son of Jacob's old age, born from the wife he loved most, Rachel. Jacob's love for Joseph was as bright as the morning sun. He looked at Joseph and his heart was filled with a special kind of joy, a joy that sparkled in his eyes whenever the boy was near. This made Joseph feel very loved and very important. Jacob wanted to show everyone how much he loved Joseph, so he made something wonderful for him. He took pieces of cloth in many beautiful colors, red like a sunset, blue like the deep sea, yellow like a field of flowers, and green like the fresh grass. He sewed them all together into a magnificent coat. It was a coat fit for a prince with long sleeves and rich patterns. When Joseph put it on, he felt his father's love wrap around him like a warm hug. He loved his special coat and wore it everywhere he went, a walking rainbow in the dusty fields. This big family was a family of shepherds. They worked hard, taking care of their father's flocks of sheep and goats. The older brothers spent long days out in the fields, guiding the animals to find fresh grass and cool water. It was a tough job under the hot sun. They were strong and hard-working men. But when they saw Joseph in his beautiful coat, a shadow would cross their faces. They did not have such fine coats. Their clothes were plain and made for work, not for showing off a father's special love. The colorful coat was a constant reminder that Joseph was different. The brothers started to feel a seed of jealousy growing in their hearts. It was a small, dark seed at first, but it grew bigger every day. Why did their father love Joseph so much more? Weren't they his sons too? They would whisper to each other when Joseph wasn't around. Their words were like sharp stones. They saw the way their father's face lit up for Joseph, and their own hearts grew a little colder. The beautiful coat, which was a symbol of love for Joseph, became a symbol of jealousy and anger for his brothers. A storm was quietly gathering inside their family. Joseph had another special thing about him. He had amazing dreams at night. These were not ordinary dreams about running or playing. They were big dreams full of meaning, like stories told by God while he slept. One night he dreamed he was in the field with his brothers. They were all tying bundles of wheat, called sheaves. Suddenly, Joseph's sheaf stood up tall and strong. Then all his brothers' sheaves bowed down to his sheaf. It was a very strange and powerful dream, and Joseph felt he had to tell his brothers about it. He ran to his brothers, his eyes wide with excitement. "Listen to the dream I had," he said. He told them all about the sheaves bowing down. The brothers looked at each other, and their faces grew dark with anger. "Do you really think you will rule over us?" they sneered. "Will you be our king?" Another night, Joseph had a dream about the sun, the moon, and 11 stars. In his dream, all of them bowed down to him. When he told this dream to his family, even his father, Jacob, was a little worried. The brothers' jealousy now burned like a hot fire. They hated him even more for his dreams. One day, the older brothers took the flocks far away to find new pastures. After some time, Jacob said to Joseph, "Go and find your brothers, see if they are well, and check on the sheep." Joseph, wanting to please his father, put on his colorful coat and set off on the long journey. He walked for a long time, searching for his brothers under the hot sun. He was happy to be on an important mission for his father. He imagined finding his brothers and sharing food with them, telling them news from home, hoping they would finally be kind to him. As Joseph came closer, his brothers saw him from far away. The sight of his colorful coat was like a spark on dry grass. "Here comes the dreamer," they said to each other with cruel smiles. The dark seed of jealousy had grown into a terrible plan. "Let's get rid of him," one said. They decided to throw him into a deep, empty pit in the ground. When Joseph arrived, happy to have found them, they grabbed him. They ripped the beautiful, colorful coat from his back. They didn't listen to his cries for help. They threw him into the dark, cold pit and left him there, alone and terrified. Down in the dark pit, Joseph was filled with fear. The bright sun was gone, replaced by a tiny patch of blue sky far above. He called for his brothers, but no one answered. He could hear their voices, but they were ignoring his pleas. He was all alone, and his heart pounded with terror and confusion. Why were they doing this to him? He was their brother. The beautiful coat, his father's gift of love, was gone. All he had now was the cold stone walls of the pit and the sound of his own frightened crying. He thought about his father, Jacob, and wondered if he would ever see him again. While the brothers were deciding what to do next, they saw a group of traders coming towards them. These traders were on their way to a faraway country called Egypt, their camels loaded with spices and goods. One of the brothers, Judah, had an idea. "What will we gain if we leave him to die in the pit?" he said. "Let's sell him to these traders. That way we get some money and we don't have to be the ones who end his life." The other brothers agreed. It was a wicked plan, but it seemed better to them than having his blood on their hands. They did not think about Joseph's fear or his future. The brothers pulled a terrified Joseph out of the pit. They didn't look him in the eye. They saw him only as something to sell. The traders looked Joseph over, a strong young boy, and agreed to buy him. They paid the brothers 20 pieces of silver. Just like that, Joseph was no longer a beloved son. He was a slave. He was tied up and forced to walk with the traders' caravan. He looked back one last time, hoping to see a sign of regret on his brothers' faces, but he saw nothing. His heart broke as he was led away, leaving his home and family behind forever. The brothers were left with the 20 pieces of silver and Joseph's torn coat. To hide their terrible secret, they killed a goat and dipped the beautiful coat in its blood. They took the bloody, ruined coat back to their father, Jacob. "We found this," they said, pretending to be sad. "Is it Joseph's coat?" When Jacob saw it, he cried out in pain. He recognized it immediately. "A wild animal has attacked him," he sobbed. "My son Joseph is gone." Jacob was filled with a grief so deep that no one could comfort him. He mourned for his favorite son for many, many years. Joseph's journey to Egypt was long and frightening. He was now a slave, with no family and no freedom. But even in this terrible situation, Joseph did not forget God. He arrived in the big, bustling land of Egypt and was sold again. This time he was bought by a man named Potiphar. Potiphar was a very important man, the captain of the Pharaoh's guard. Joseph was taken to Potiphar's large and wealthy house to work as a servant. It was a strange new world, with a different language, different gods, and different ways of life. Joseph must have felt very small and very alone in this grand place. Even though he was a slave, Joseph worked hard. He did every task he was given with honesty and care. He didn't complain or feel sorry for himself. He put his heart into his work, whether it was cleaning the house or managing supplies. Potiphar quickly noticed that Joseph was not like his other servants. Everything Joseph did seemed to succeed. The household ran more smoothly, the crops in the field grew better, and there was a feeling of order and prosperity. Potiphar saw that Joseph was wise and trustworthy, and he believed that God was with Joseph, blessing everything he touched. Potiphar was so impressed with Joseph that he promoted him. Joseph was no longer just a simple servant. Potiphar put him in charge of his entire household. Joseph managed all of Potiphar's business, his fields, and all the other servants. Potiphar trusted him completely. He didn't have to worry about anything in his house because he knew Joseph would take care of it with perfect integrity. For a while, things were much better for Joseph. He had an important position and was respected. He was still a slave, but he had earned a place of honor through his hard work and good character. But trouble was waiting for Joseph. Potiphar's wife saw that Joseph was a handsome young man. She began to want him for herself. Day after day she would try to get Joseph to do wrong with her, but Joseph refused. "My master trusts me with everything in this house," he told her. "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" His integrity was strong. One day, when no one else was in the house, she grabbed his cloak. Joseph ran away so fast that he left his cloak in her hand. Angry and embarrassed, she decided to lie. She screamed and accused Joseph of attacking her, using his cloak as proof. When Potiphar came home, his wife told him her terrible lie. She showed him Joseph's cloak and said, "That Hebrew slave you brought here tried to harm me." Potiphar was filled with fury. He believed his wife's story without even asking Joseph for his side. His trust in Joseph vanished in an instant, replaced by rage. He did not remember all the good Joseph had done for him. Without a fair trial, Potiphar had Joseph arrested. The young man who had risen so high was now thrown into the king's prison, a dark and miserable place for people who had angered the Pharaoh. Once again, Joseph was in a dark place, just like the pit his brothers had thrown him into. He was innocent, but he was being punished for a crime he did not commit. He was surrounded by criminals and despair. It would have been easy for him to become bitter and angry at the injustice. He had been betrayed by his brothers and now by Potiphar's wife. It seemed that every time he started to do well, something terrible happened to pull him back down. Yet even in the cold, damp dungeon, Joseph did not lose his faith. He continued to trust that God was with him, even when he couldn't see the way forward. Just as he had in Potiphar's house, Joseph lived with integrity inside the prison. The head jailer soon noticed Joseph's character and abilities. He saw that Joseph was responsible, kind, and wise. The jailer began to trust him, just as Potiphar had. Before long, the jailer put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners. Joseph was the one who managed the daily life of the prison. The jailer didn't have to worry about anything because he knew Joseph would handle it all perfectly. God was still with Joseph, and he made everything Joseph did succeed, even in a place as hopeless as a prison. Joseph's life in prison was steady for a time. He was a prisoner, but he had a position of responsibility. He had found a way to serve and to live with purpose even in the worst of circumstances. He wasn't free, but he wasn't completely broken either. He spent his days managing the other prisoners, listening to their stories, and offering what comfort he could. He was learning patience and how to lead in difficult situations. He did not know it, but these years in the dungeon were preparing him for an even greater task that was still to come. He was being shaped in the darkness for a future that would be brighter than he could ever imagine. One day, 2 new prisoners arrived at the jail. They were not ordinary criminals. One was the Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, the man who served him wine. The other was the Pharaoh's chief baker. They had both done something to displease the king of Egypt and had been thrown into the same prison as Joseph. The jailer put them under Joseph's care. Joseph looked after them, bringing them their food and making sure they were all right. He treated these former royal servants with the same kindness and respect he showed to everyone. He was a servant to them, even though he was their manager in the prison. One morning, Joseph came to see the cupbearer and the baker and noticed they both looked very sad and worried. "Why do you look so troubled today?" he asked them gently. They replied, "We each had a dream last night, but there is no one here to tell us what our dreams mean." In ancient Egypt, people believed that dreams were important messages, and they were very upset that they couldn't understand them. Joseph's face lit up with a calm confidence. "Interpreting dreams comes from God," he said. "Please tell me your dreams." He knew this was a special gift he had. The chief cupbearer went first. "In my dream," he said, "I saw a vine with 3 branches. It grew buds, blossomed, and produced ripe grapes. I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and gave the cup to Pharaoh." Joseph listened carefully and then explained the meaning. "This is a good dream. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift you up and give you back your job. You will be his cupbearer again." Then Joseph added a personal plea. "When you are free, please remember me. Mention me to Pharaoh and help me get out of this prison." Then the chief baker, feeling hopeful, shared his dream. "I also had a dream," he said. "I had 3 baskets of white bread on my head for Pharaoh, but birds came and ate the bread from the top basket." Joseph's face grew sad as he interpreted this dream. "This is not a good dream," he said softly. "The 3 baskets are also 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift you up, but he will have you executed, and the birds will eat your flesh." Everything happened exactly as Joseph had said. 3 days later, the cupbearer was restored to his job, and the baker was executed. But the cupbearer, in his happiness, forgot all about Joseph. 2 full years passed. Joseph remained in the dark prison, forgotten by the cupbearer he had helped. He must have felt his hope fade with each passing day. He had come so close to freedom, only to be left behind again. But Joseph continued to wait patiently, trusting in God's timing. Meanwhile, in the grand palace, Pharaoh, the king of all Egypt, began to have troubling dreams. One night, he dreamed he was standing by the Nile River. 7 fat, healthy cows came out of the river to eat grass. Then, 7 thin, sickly cows came out and ate the 7 fat cows. but the thin cows remained just as skinny as before. Pharaoh woke up, disturbed, but fell asleep again and had another dream. This time, he saw 7 full, healthy heads of grain growing on a single stalk. Then, 7 thin, withered heads of grain sprouted up after them. The 7 thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy heads. In the morning, Pharaoh was deeply troubled. He knew these dreams were important, but he didn't know what they meant. He called for all the wise men and magicians in Egypt. He told them his dreams, but not one of them could explain their meaning. This made Pharaoh even more anxious and frustrated. It was then that the chief cupbearer suddenly remembered. His conscience pricked him. He went to Pharaoh and bowed low. "Today I remember my failings," he said. "When I was in prison with the chief baker, we both had a dream. A young Hebrew man, a slave, was there with us. He interpreted our dreams for us, and everything happened exactly as he said it would." Hearing this, Pharaoh was desperate for an answer. "Bring this man to me at once," he commanded. Guards rushed to the prison, and Joseph was quickly brought out of the dungeon. He was shaved and given clean clothes to wear before being presented to the most powerful man in the land. Pharaoh looked at Joseph and said, "I have had dreams that no one can interpret. I have heard that you can understand them." Joseph answered with great humility, showing he was not taking credit for himself. "I cannot do it," Joseph said, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Pharaoh then described his 2 dreams about the cows and the grain. Joseph listened intently, and with wisdom from God, he explained the meaning. "The 2 dreams are one and the same," Joseph declared. "God is showing Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 fat cows and 7 healthy heads of grain represent 7 years of great abundance and plentiful food all across Egypt. After the 7 years of plenty," Joseph continued, "there will come 7 years of terrible famine. The hunger will be so severe that everyone will forget there was ever a time of abundance. The famine will ruin the land." Joseph then offered the king some wise advice. "Now, let Pharaoh find a wise and discerning man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let him appoint officials to collect 1/5 of the harvest during the 7 good years. They should store this grain in cities under Pharaoh's control. This food will be a reserve for the 7 years of famine so that the country will not be destroyed." Pharaoh and all his officials were amazed by Joseph's wisdom. This young man not only interpreted the dreams, but also provided a perfect plan to save the nation. Pharaoh looked at his officials and said, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh turned to Joseph. "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only I on the throne will be greater than you." In a single day, Joseph went from being a prisoner to being the 2nd most powerful man in Egypt. Pharaoh gave Joseph his own signet ring, dressed him in fine linen clothes, and put a gold chain around his neck. He gave him a new Egyptian name and a wife from a noble family. Joseph was now 30 years old. He had been a slave and a prisoner for 13 years, but now he was the governor of Egypt. For the next 7 years, Joseph traveled throughout the land, overseeing the collection of grain. Just as he had predicted, the harvests were incredibly abundant. He stored up so much grain in the storehouses that it was like the sand of the sea. They couldn't even measure it all. Then, the 7 years of plenty came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had foretold. There was no food in any of the surrounding lands, and people were starving. But in Egypt, there was grain. When the Egyptian people cried out to Pharaoh for food, he told them, "Go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you." Joseph opened the storehouses and began to sell grain to the Egyptians. The famine was severe not only in Egypt, but in all the nearby countries. People from all over the world started traveling to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because he was the only one who had any to sell. The famine was also terrible in the land of Canaan, where Jacob and his family lived. When Jacob heard there was grain in Egypt, he sent 10 of his sons to go and buy some. He kept his youngest son Benjamin at home with him, because he was afraid something bad might happen to him, just as it had to Joseph. The 10 brothers journeyed to Egypt. When they arrived, they had to go before the powerful governor to ask for food. They bowed down low before him, their faces to the ground. They did not recognize that this mighty Egyptian ruler was their own brother, Joseph, whom they had sold into slavery so many years ago. Joseph recognized his brothers immediately. His heart was flooded with emotion, but he kept his face like a mask. He decided to test them to see if they had changed. He spoke harshly to them through an interpreter. "You are spies," he accused. "No, my lord," they pleaded. "We are honest men. We are 12 brothers, sons of one man. Our youngest brother is with our father, and one is no more." Hearing them mention the brother who was no more, Joseph knew they were talking about him. He put them in prison for 3 days, then told them he would keep one brother, Simeon, as a hostage until they returned with their youngest brother, Benjamin, to prove their story. The brothers were terrified. They said to one another, "Surely we are being punished for what we did to our brother Joseph. We saw his distress when he pleaded with us, but we wouldn't listen." They did not know that Joseph could understand every word they were saying. Hearing their guilt, Joseph had to turn away to hide his tears. He took Simeon and had him bound before their eyes. He then had their bags filled with grain, but secretly he also had their silver money returned to their sacks. When the brothers discovered the money on their way home, they were filled with even more fear, believing they would be accused of theft. They returned to Jacob and told him everything. When Jacob heard he had to send Benjamin to Egypt, he refused. "Joseph is gone and Simeon is gone. Now you want to take Benjamin? Everything is against me," he cried. But the famine grew worse, and eventually Judah promised to personally guarantee Benjamin's safety. So they journeyed back to Egypt with Benjamin. When Joseph saw Benjamin, he was overcome with love and had to leave the room to weep. After testing them one final time, Joseph could not pretend any longer. He sent all the Egyptians out of the room, and through his tears he cried out, "I am Joseph! Is my father still alive?" The brothers were too stunned and frightened to speak. "Come closer," he said gently. "Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. It was not you who sent me here, but God." Joseph had forgiven them completely. He sent for his father and their entire family to come live safely in Egypt, turning a story of betrayal into a beautiful story of forgiveness, reconciliation, and God's amazing plan.